You woke up one day and realized that thing you used to love, it just doesn't mean anything anymore. The hobby that consumed your weekends now feels empty. The career you chased for years now feels like a waste of time. The conversations that used to energize you, now they just drain you. And the most unsettling part, you have no freaking idea why. There wasn't some huge event, no conscious decision. The passion just evaporated, like it was never even there. And now you're wondering, what the heck is wrong with me? Well, Eckhart Tolle has an answer for that. And it flies in the face of everything society's taught you about purpose, passion, and happiness. The truth is, you're not broken. You're awakening, and what's being stripped away from you was never really yours to begin with. Today, I'm going to reveal why a spiritual awakening kills your old interests, why it's not depression, and what's emerging in place of what's gone. But first, I need you to understand something Eckhart Tolle explains with brutal clarity. He says that most people live their entire lives governed by two forces, desire and fear. Desire is the need to add something to yourself, to feel more complete. Fear is the anxiety of losing something and becoming diminished. These two forces obscure a fundamental truth. The being, in its fullness, is already within you. Now, it needs no addition. It can't be subtracted from. But the ego doesn't accept that. The ego needs projects. It needs achievements. It needs passions that define it. I'm a musician. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an athlete. These identities give the ego a sense of solidity, a sense that it exists, a sense that it's someone. And here's what happens during the awakening. Awareness begins to emerge, and when it emerges, it starts to dissolve the false structures that the ego has built. That includes your passions, your hobbies, your ambitions. Because many of those things weren't expressions of your true self. They were crutches that the ego used to feel real. And when the crutch is removed, you feel an emptiness that feels scary, and an emptiness that feels like depression. But it's not. It's space. Space for something your conditioned self could never have received. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine someone who spent their entire life loving to collect things. Could be stamps, coins, shoes, handbags, anything. This collection gave them a sense of identity, of purpose, of fulfillment. But one day, after an awakening event, whether it's a crisis, a loss, or just an unexplainable internal shift, they look at their collection and feel absolutely nothing. The objects that once sparkled now just seem like meaningless bits of matter. What happened, Eckhart Tolle would say? That she stopped identifying with external things. The ego, that needed those objects to feel complete, started to lose power. And without the ego feeding meaning into those objects, they revealed themselves for what they always were. Just things. This is liberating, and it's terrifying. Liberating because she's no longer a slave to that desire. Terrifying because now she doesn't know who she is without it. And this is the central point I need you to understand. The loss of interest isn't about the hobbies or passions themselves. It's about the identity that was attached to them. When you awaken, you start to disidentify. You start to realize that you aren't your thoughts, you aren't your emotion, you aren't your achievements, you aren't your failures. And if you aren't any of those things, then who are you? That question is the heart of the awakening. And it creates an existential vacuum that many mistake for depression. But there's a crucial difference. In clinical depression, there's an inability to feel pleasure. There's a weight. There's a darkness that seems to have no way out. In awakening, what happens is different. There's a loss of interest, yes, but there are also moments of absolute clarity, moments of inexplicable peace, moments when you look at a tree and feel a connection you've never felt before. The difference is that in depression you're sinking, In awakening, you're emptying yourself out, so you can be filled by something bigger. Now I need to reveal something that few talk about regarding this process. When your old interests die, they don't disappear all at once, and they die little by little, and each death brings with it a mourning. You might miss who you were. You might miss the simplicity of when those things still meant something. You might even feel angry at yourself for having changed. This is normal. This is part of the process. Eckhart Tolle says that for many people, limitations, failures, losses, or pain in any form become the greatest teachers. They teach the person to let go of false self-images and goals dictated by the superficial ego. They give depth, humility, and compassion. They make the person more real. And that's what's happening with you. The things you've lost interest in weren't you. They were extensions of a self that was trying to fill a void that can't be filled by anything external. And now that that illusion is crumbling, you're finally having the chance to discover what really matters. But here comes the part that scares most people in the awakening process. Before new passions emerge, there's a period of apparent emptiness. You might spend weeks, months, even years, without feeling that excitement you felt before, without having projects that move you, without having goals that illuminate your path. And the natural tendency is to panic, force new passions, try to artificially recreate the enthusiasm that's gone. But Eckhart Tolle warns against that. He says that you can still be active, you can still manifest and create new forms and circumstances, but you won't be identified with them. You won't need them to give you a sense of self. And this is the secret that separates passions of the ego from expressions of the true self. Passions of the ego come from a place of lack. I need this to be happy. I need to conquer that to feel complete. I need this hobby to have an identity. Expressions of the true self come from a place of fullness. I'm already complete, and from that completeness, I choose to create this. I choose to engage in that, not because I need to, but because it's a natural expression of who I am. The difference is subtle, but it changes absolutely everything. Let me tell you about something Eckhart Tolle calls the typical cycle of desire. First, you feel a lack. Something seems to be missing from you. You don't know exactly what it is, but there's an emptiness. Then a desire arises. If I have this, I'll feel complete. If I conquer that, I'll be happy. If I dedicate myself to this hobby, I'll have purpose. You chase the desire, you dedicate time, energy, money, and eventually you get it. And for a brief moment, you feel satisfied. The lack has disappeared, the emptiness has been filled. But how long does that satisfaction last? Days? Weeks? If you're lucky, a few months. And then the emptiness returns, and you need something more, something bigger, something different. This is the endless cycle that keeps people trapped their entire lives, and what waking up does is interrupt that cycle, violently sometimes, uncomfortably, almost always, because when you wake up, you realize that no external achievement will fill the void. No weekend hobby, no matter how passionate, will complete you. No identity, no matter how impressive it seems, will give you the peace you're looking for. And that realization kills the desire. Not because you're depressed, but because you finally see the illusion for what it is. And that brings us to a truth that Eckhart Tolle articulates so magnificently. He quotes Buddha saying that pain arises through desire or craving, and to be free from pain, we need to cut the ties of desire. But Tolle goes further. He's not talking about denying the world or living as an ascetic. He's talking about a shift in identity. When you stop identifying with your desires, they lose power over you. You can still have preferences, you can still make choices, you can still create things in the world, but you're no longer a slave to the need for those things to happen in order for you to feel good. And that freedom is what's being born in you as your old interests die. Now I'm going to give you 5 signs that you're going through this process of transformation and not clinical depression. First sign, you have moments of deep peace. In depression, there's a constant darkness, a weight that doesn't lift. But if you're waking up, even in the midst of losing interest, there will be moments of inexplicable quiet, moments when you simply are, and that is enough. Second sign, you're more present. Paradoxically, while losing interest in doing things, you may notice that you're more aware of simply being. You notice details that previously went unnoticed, the sound of the rain and the texture of a leaf, the warmth of the sun on your skin. Third sign, superficial relationships bother you more. Before, you could participate in empty conversations without a problem. Now they drain you. You seek depth. You seek authenticity. And when you don't find it, you prefer silence. Fourth sign, you question everything you accepted as truth. Your beliefs about success, happiness, purpose, everything starts to be examined. What was once certainty is now questioning. And that's not confusion. It's waking up. Fifth sign, you feel that something bigger is happening. Even in the midst of discomfort, there's an intuition that this is taking you somewhere. You don't know where. You can't explain it. But something in you knows that this process is necessary. If you recognize these signs, you're not depressed. You're in transition. And transitions are uncomfortable by nature. Eckhart Tolle describes this as going through what the mystics call the dark night of the soul. In this period, you become extremely aware of your separation. Separation from yourself, from other people, from the divine. It's a time when you feel completely lost and lonely, isolated. But here's what the mystics also know. The dark night precedes the dawn. The emptiness you're feeling is not the end. It's the space between what you were and what you're becoming. It's the chrysalis before the butterfly. It's the death before the rebirth. There's something else I need to share. Something that Eckhart Tolle explains about the nature of emptiness, and it completely changes how you experience this period. He says that the ego is always searching, always looking for the next thing that will finally bring satisfaction. This incessant search is exhausting, and it never ends, because the ego can never be truly satisfied. But when the interests die, when the desire diminishes, something happens. The search stops. And the moment the search stops, you finally have space to perceive what has always been there. Tolle calls this being, the silent presence that exists before thoughts, before emotions, before desires, the pure awareness that doesn't need anything to exist. And paradoxically, it's in this place of non-needing that true joy resides. Not the feverish joy of getting something you wanted, but a deeper joy. A peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. A contentment that exists simply because you exist. This is what's being revealed to you as your old interests die. You're being forced to stop searching outside so that you can finally find what has always been within. Many people are afraid that if they lose all their interests, they'll become vegetables. They'll simply sit and stare at nothing for the rest of their lives. They'll lose all motivation to do anything. This doesn't happen. What happens is a recalibration. Your motives for acting change. Before, you acted because you needed to fill a void. Now you act because it's a natural expression of your being. The difference is that the action that comes from fullness has a different quality. It's more fluid, less forced, more sustainable, less desperate. You'll still do things in the world, maybe even more than you did before, but you'll do it from a different place. And that place changes everything. Eckhart Tolle uses the example of nature. A tree doesn't need motivation to grow. It simply grows because that's its nature. A river doesn't need passion to flow. It simply flows because that's what rivers do. Similarly, when you anchor yourself in your true being, action happens naturally. You don't need to motivate yourself. You don't need to force yourself. Life simply expresses itself through you. And that expression might look very different from what it looked like before. Maybe before, you were obsessed with accumulating money. Now, maybe you feel drawn to teaching. Maybe before, you spent hours in competitions. Now, maybe you prefer collaboration. Maybe before, you sought recognition. Now, maybe you find satisfaction in anonymity. These changes don't mean that there's something wrong. They mean that you're aligning with who you really are, instead of who the ego thought you should be. Let me tell you about what Tolle calls conscious manifestation. He says that many people ask about finding their purpose and how that connects to spiritual awakening. And Eckhart Tolle explains that your life's purpose unfolds through the activities you engage in what he calls the horizontal dimension, the dimension of doing. But there's another dimension, the vertical dimension, the dimension of being. And when you neglect the vertical dimension in favor of only the horizontal, you lose the very foundation of existence. You become a doer without being, and eventually, that doer collapses under its own weight. What's happening to you right now, that loss of interest in doing, is an invitation to explore the dimension of being, not forever, not permanently, but for enough time, for you to discover who you are beyond what you do. And when that discovery happens, you can go back to doing, but now with roots, with foundation, with a base that doesn't depend on external results. Eckhart Tolle shares that when he went through his own awakening, there was a period of years where he basically did nothing. He'd sit on park benches, he'd watch people, he'd exist. Most would look at that and say he was wasting his life. But he was actually discovering something that most people never discover, that existing is enough, that being is complete in itself. And it was from that discovery that all of his later work emerged, not from a place of lack, but from fulfillment, not from need, but from expression. The same thing can happen to you. That emptiness you're experiencing now can be the fertile ground from which your most authentic contribution will sprout. But that only happens if you allow the emptiness, if you resist the temptation to fill it prematurely with cheap substitutes. Now let me give you something practical to navigate this period. First, stop forcing new passions. I know the temptation is huge. You want to feel alive again. You want to have something that moves you, but forcing it will only create more frustration. Instead, allow yourself to be in the emptiness. Allow yourself to not know. Allow yourself to simply exist without needing an activity to define you. Second, cultivate presence instead of passion. Eckhart Tolle teaches that if you keep your attention on your body as much as possible, you'll be anchored in the now. You won't get lost in the external world, and you won't get lost in your mind. When thoughts of, "I have no passion for anything anymore," arise, come back to the body. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your breath going in and out. This brings you back to the only moment that exists. Third, observe what naturally attracts your attention. Not forcing, not seeking, just observing. When you're relaxed, with no agenda, what captures your interest? It might be something small. It might be something unexpected. It might be something your old self would never consider. These glimpses of natural interest are seeds. Don't force them to grow. Just acknowledge that they exist. Fourth, accept that you may never have passion in the old way again. And that's not a bad thing. The passion of the ego is febrile. It's compulsive. It's a need disguised as interest. What comes after awakening is different. It's calmer, more sustainable, less dramatic, but infinitely more satisfying. You can engage in activities without the maniacal intensity from before, and that calm can seem like apathy at first, but it's not. It's spiritual maturity. Fifth, find others who are going through the same process. You're not alone. Millions of people around the world are experiencing exactly what you're experiencing. Finding them, even if it's online, can make a huge difference, because when you see that others have survived this transition, when you hear their stories of how new expressions emerged from the emptiness, you gain hope. and hope is fuel to get through the dark night. There's also something important about timing that I need to mention. Each person goes through this process at their own pace. Some spend months in the emptiness, others spend years. There's no formula, there's no timeline. And trying to rush the process only prolongs it, because the emptiness has a function. It's showing you that you can exist without the crutches you've always used. It's proving to yourself that your value doesn't depend on what you produce. And until that lesson is completely integrated, the emptiness remains. This isn't punishment, it's pedagogy. The universe is teaching you something you need to learn before you can move forward. So, what to do practically while you wait? First, keep your body healthy. When the mind is in transition, the body needs stability. Sleep well, eat well, move. This won't solve the existential question, but it will give you the physical foundation to go through it. Second, limit external stimulus, social media, the news, constant entertainment. All of this can be used to escape the emptiness, and escaping the emptiness only makes it more scary when you inevitably face it again. Instead of consuming non-stop, allow yourself to be bored. It's in that boredom that insights often emerge. Third, write. Put into words what you're experiencing. Not to publish, not to share, just to process. The act of articulating the experience helps to integrate it. Fourth, be in contact with nature. Nature doesn't ask you to be productive. It simply is. And when you spend time in it, you remember that existing is enough, that there's nothing to prove, nothing to conquer. Fifth, be kind to yourself. You're going through one of the most profound transitions a human being can go through. Don't criticize yourself for not being enthusiastic. Don't judge yourself for not having clear passions. You're exactly where you need to be, and remember this always. What seems to be loss is actually liberation. What seems to be emptiness is actually space. What seems to be death is actually preparation for a rebirth. You're not losing interest in life. You're losing interest in the false versions of you that the life you were living served. And when those versions die completely, what remains will be more real, more authentic, and more alive than anything you've ever experienced before. If this video is resonating with you, if it's putting words to something you're living but didn't know how to explain, consider clicking on the Super Thanks button below. This support allows content like this to continue being created, content that most channels avoid because it demands vulnerability and brutal honesty. You're not just another passive viewer, you're an active seeker, and seekers sustain other seekers. Now, practice for the next few days. When you notice that you've lost interest in something you once loved, instead of panicking or forcing enthusiasm, do the following. Sit in silence. Close your eyes and ask yourself, who inside me needed that activity? What part of me was being fed by it? You'll often find it was the ego. It was the part of you that needed an identity, that needed to feel special, that needed something to show the world. And when you see that clearly, the loss of interest stops being a tragedy. It becomes a liberation. You're being freed from the prison of needing external things to feel real. And in the space that opens up, something new can be born. Something that isn't about filling a void, but about expressing a fullness that already exists. Now tell me in the comments, what passion or hobby has completely lost its meaning after your awakening? Be honest. Many are going through this now and need to know they're not alone. I read all the comments in the first few hours and respond to as many as I can. And remember, what seems to be dying in you isn't you. It's just a version of you that has served its purpose. What's being born doesn't have a name yet, doesn't have a form yet, but it's coming. Trust the process. Trust the emptiness. Trust in yourself. And if you need a reminder, burn this into your mind. The emptiness isn't the opposite of fullness. The emptiness is the path to fullness. It's the necessary space for something new to be born. It's the pause between one chapter and another in your life. You haven't lost your passions. You've transcended the need for them to define you. And on the other side of this transition, there's a version of you that acts from joy instead of desperation, that creates from fullness instead of lack, that lives from presence instead of escape. That version is waiting for you, patiently, silently. And it can only emerge when you completely let go of the version that needed external passions to feel alive. So let go, with courage, with confidence, with the certainty that the universe didn't bring you this far to abandon you. Until the next awakening, the awareness that you are doesn't need hobbies to be complete. It already is, always has been, always will be. And in this moment, that truth is being revealed to you.